papers.
No. We'll talk through it.
All righty.
You ask about penalty provisions for the 10D, the 10 sections, it's 35-17-10. And our administrative rule, which expands on the statute of 35-17-1-14B1B, says failure to file, late filing, or filing incomplete or inaccurate designation of treasurer or statement of contributions or expenditures allows a fine of between $15 and $500 per day. And D2 is, and it says Division D of Section 35-17-10. So all provisions under 10D are included therein.
I want to make sure I understood you say between 15 and 500. That's quite some latitude.
That is correct.
And 13B is maximum $100 a day.
Here's the maximum of 100. 35-17-1-14B1A, which covers 35-17-13 A, B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
Is between $15 and $100 per day. And what it is the statute allows $100 per day or 500, and our rule extends that to giving a broader allowance.
And D2, who does that apply to? It starts out the treasurer shall keep a strict account, but it's not before us.
Correct. And that's all it says.
So D2, if the treasurer is not before us, is that a statute that even applies?
I mean, I guess I'd say it certainly applies, but I don't know that we can technically apply it. It applies to
quite circular.
Does that mean that we can find the campaign committee?
The committee,
correct?
Yeah, say
We
treasurer.
can't bring the treasurer in.
Separate. No, because they don't, they need an audit.
correct.
You're just talking about 13B violation. Right?
Correct. Primarily.
Or a statute that applies to the universe, but not this case.
So it seems as if our hands are tied by the $100 per day, which puts us at just north of 50,000. I propose that we impose a fine of 50,000.
On that count.
I think that's the only one we can
Okay.
impose, because the other one around the treasurer and they were not named as part of the lawsuit. For the petition, I guess it would be.
So the committee isn't,
The committee can be liable for 35-17 D2.
E2 just said treasurer. That's what the statute said.
This is not yours. Catherine, that is you.
There you go. Here's the front.
Hey, I have an extra. This is open and it's in front of you. Oh, that I don't know.
oh,
but-
in our book.
I think these are.
It's on page 11.
It'll be a page or two in.
Page 15, 16.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've looked at the book.
Page 16. Well, page 16. Page 16 talks the treasurer appointed shall keep strict,
Maybe I just about it.
Well, doesn't two, the treasurer appointed under division D1, it refers back to D1, which does include campaign committee.
What's a little weird in two is the treasurer's appointed and he will keep strict account of all contributions for whom received, etc. But then under 3A, except as otherwise provided, a campaign committee shall deposit. So it's acting as they're two different people. That to separate duties, that one is going to keep strict account of all contributions and the other of the deposits.
If they get the money, it's their duty to deposit it, right? So Phil, I have another question.
Do my best.
When we're talking about 351713B, you said it's joint and several liability unless we make a finding otherwise. Would you make a separate finding as to each?
I am not aware of anything that would prohibit us from doing that. That's classically not how we've done it, but
And a separate fine as to each?
I believe so, yes. Again, that's generally not, I mean, you look at the breadth of our cases, that's not.
Right.
the
I'm
way,
not
but-
suggesting to do it, I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
So are we still at the point where two says the treasurer appointed, and because it seems like shall be charged, the treasurer is charged with keeping a strict account of all contributions, and because the complaint wasn't filed against the treasurer, that we can't include that in any penalty phase? Is that what we're saying?
Based on the way the statute's written, the responsibility lies, as it relates to that section, I believe the responsibility lies with the treasurer, yes.
They're not a named party, so
They're not
you
a
can't
named party.
do anything to them.
Okay, where's that leave us?
That would leave us,
13B.
13B. And on the penalty stage, just as Scott stated in his, motion.
Was that a motion?
We just been discussing.
I was going to say, because we haven't even found guilt yet, have we?
Just like, wait, how come I couldn't do the motion?
Yeah, he preempted me.
Dennis tried, and I shut that down.
Yeah, no, rightly so.
And I think what we're trying to do today is not necessarily move. I think we're trying to get a consensus so that Phil can put together a written opinion. And at the next meeting, we would move to then adopt the written opinion, I think.
That's the general approach that I have been
Yeah, I don't think we're
moving forward.
necessarily doing we could do, that's what Phil started with. Do we do a motion and specific findings now, or do we have a general discussion and him reduce it to writing and let everybody digest it and consider?
Well, I, of course, will defer to the majority, but I think we ought to find a violation and then assess a penalty and then let Phil write it up. And then we'll review it next meeting and vote on it.
Well, if we move today, then we are voting on it. That's why
That's fine then. You're right, we are.
I think that would be action. And quite frankly, I think, in fairness, I think I prefer to see it writing. And I think also have Natasha have the ability to weigh in on it.
Do her own deliberation and listen to us if she chooses. That might be exciting. Yeah. Give her something to do. From the moment, other than worry. Right.
Does anybody else have thoughts on the proposed amount?
No, it seems to me like the only, I don't disagree that a significant fine and message of you can't just ignore is important, particularly given the gravity of the expenditures and what was happening. The question in my mind is, do you separately find the candidate and the committee? Is it one fine, joint, and several to both?
I think, joint several would be sufficient.
Yeah.
I think deterrent is the fine. And I think that's what we're ultimately going to be the deterrent. And I look at it from our perspective as we're sitting here as a commission. What's the most likely ability for us to be able to collect on that fine? And when you look at the committee, knowing that they have this treasure trove of funds sitting there, I presume he would pay out of his own pocket, but I think the ultimate reason here that we're trying to impose this penalty is so people don't continue to do that in the future.
Well, and I agree with you, and I think it's important to send the message of responsibility of running your campaign, but I don't think, at least I don't want to send a message that dissuades people from participating in the political process. We just need to participate responsibly, and we want them to participate. So it's sort of my view.
I agree with what each has said to this point. I think it's important that treasurers and campaign committees are responsible. Now, in this case, we don't have an action against the treasurer, but the treasurer should have been responsible as well. And I think they're going back to what needs to happen with the General Assembly. There needs to be more work on educating treasurers on their responsibilities, whether it's, prescribed by the Ohio General Assembly, or whether it's the Secretary of State requiring some kind of training of appointed treasurers. so that people know what they're getting into, because most of them are volunteers. There are some, like Mr. McTighe and his firm, that take on that responsibility for a number of candidates, but most are volunteers, and they're not all CPAs. They're good friends of candidates, and they take on the responsibility. Some are just negligent, but you don't know that unless they've been trained. And so I think we need to send a message that's clear so people are aware that there are serious responsibilities when you become a treasurer. And whether it's voting the committee, which ultimately works with the treasurer, accountable in this case, and the candidate, I think that's the way to send a message, so that all are responsible.
And I think it's pertinent in this case because the candidate, it wasn't a newbie, longtime candidate, had gone through the process, knew the process, and the accountant was the exact same way. I mean, she handled multiple accounts, multiple PACs, multiple candidates. It just, to me, it defies logic.
So that's towards joint several, correct?
Correct.
Well, and then the decision comes out, it says joint several. The futures individuals and committees that we choose to deter for misconduct, they'll just see joint several. That means they both can be responsible.
I think so.
I think that some discussion of Mr. Tavares's comments in the parties before the commission should be part of the opinion. It's my view. We need it as it relates to the responsibility of a treasurer is not a part of it.
And unfortunately, because Mr. Hicks didn't bring the treasurer, I would think there's going to be an argument that the treasurer can't be brought back before this commission because it was a party that should have been joined from the very get-go, but was not.
Yeah. And I'm not saying bring a separate action for the treasurer. I'm just saying when you're talking about, if you want to send a message about what the responsibility is of the campaign committee, of the candidate, of the treasurer, then as part of the substance of the opinion, because you're talking about an affirmative duty of those people to proactively comply with the law, not just do nothing.
Let me ask you this, so
It should all
if you were writing the opinion, are you saying that we're laying out or having the findings of facts, all who were involved, and then taking it the next step of, then taking it the next step of, this is what the treasurer is responsible for, should have been done. However, the treasurer was not named in this.
Yeah. I don't know that I would be that specific, other than when you're talking about the affirmative obligations, to spell out the affirmative obligations of who has the affirmative obligation. The campaign committee, the treasurer, and the candidate. We have the treasurer and the candidate before us, and therefore.
But we don't have the treasurer.
The candidate and the candidate.
And I think if you go into something about the treasurer's responsibilities, then I think in the opinion writing, it's incumbent upon us to mention that the treasurer is not mentioned, or you have a red herring fact in
Right.
to a certain degree.
Okay. We can leave it out, but I just feel like it.
I'm not saying leave it out. I'm saying
Yeah.
that you're gonna have to, we should point out that the treasurer was not brought as a part. If we feel it's important, to lay out the treasurer's duty and responsibility, okay? We should also put in there that the treasurer was not named, because if you just,
I got it.
if somebody picked this up and read it, and we say all this about the treasurer, and then there's no finding against the treasurer, they would say, well, what happened with the treasurer?
I welcome anybody else to weigh in. I'm just saying if you start out with the idea that we've got this we think that there's an important obligation here, then, and we want to send a message. I think there's a big hole if we send a message as to, you know,
What I will add is, it's somewhat similar to what's kind of an adjunct to what Ms. Tavares talked about, where there's a real dichotomy in who is a treasurer. You know, the Ms. Jones, who's obviously the treasurer here, and the firm for which she works, and there are other firms, and you mentioned Mr. McTighe's firm that does a lot of treasurer work. That's one thing. But I just got off the phone last week with a gentleman who is involved because a campaign committee was never terminated. The guy's talking to me is from the Dayton area. Montgomery County referred him for failing to file, or a late filing of an annual report. I only got into this because, you know, my friend Jerry, and he's been dead for 5 years, you know, and that's the other end of that,
right.
you know, which makes it difficult. And I'm not saying I'm not going to put in what you're talking about, because I think it's appropriate, but I talk with a lot of people who, you know, my friend Fred asked me to do this, and I said, okay. And should they know better? I think the simple answer would be yes. But a lot of people don't realize that when they get into it. And the next thing they know, all of a sudden, you know, they're getting love notes from the commission saying you've been referred for family file.
Well, I mean, one good thing that I think that was done was that removing that the treasurer's name had to be on the disclosure or the campaign or whatever, because people used to get people
Just
to be the treasurer as like a another type of endorsement. Like, who would be good to name their treasurer? Somebody that people in the community know.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
that used to be a very common practice.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, to your point, Phil, I think that's the whole point of the fine and the penalty and what we consider in all of these. Because, you know, it's unusual for the commission, I would say, you're welcome to take issue, but it's unusual for the commission to really impose large fines most of the time. A lot of, because people who have sophisticated campaign committees who are retaining private consultants to do this work for them, they don't come before us that often because they do have paid professionals and their stuff's right because they know what to do. But we do have a lot of people that come before us who are first timers, maybe in a rural election, and, you know, they could resolve their issues if they just chuck a box or if they just do whatever. And I think that, I'd like to think that the commission, in terms of fines and penalties, but also in terms of working with candidates, which is one of the things that I really liked when we were virtual. Because I thought one of the benefits of virtual was we really had the opportunity to have people who could appear before us without having to invest 5 hours of travel in their day.
Take off a day of work.
And take off a day of work and who were genuinely interested in resolving issues and came before the commission in an effort to do that. And the history of the commission was to work with them and help them come into compliance and resolve their issues. And sometimes there was a fine, but it was never, it reflected appropriately, I think, the expertise of the people and the size of the campaign. So I'm not worried about, you know, I think sending a message is partly about there are responsibilities that have to be made, but that's why we have discretion, I think, in fines and penalties.
I think Phil said he was going to incorporate something along the lines of what Otto said, and I agree. I think if you read 10D2, had the treasurer been named, let's face it, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. But the fact that she wasn't named, we're saying that has to be outside of this.
Right.
But it doesn't mean we can't nonetheless mention and then have a caveat that the treasurer hasn't been named in this instant case. It just makes sense to me.
Providing guidance.
For those future candidates, campaign committees, and people who may be asked to be a treasurer, right?
So we need to come to a number.
Well, I think your number is about as appropriate as any number I've heard. If you take the $100 a day and look at how long this has been, it's a little over 50,000. I don't think that's out of the realm when we know how serious a violation this is. So 50,000 is fine with me.
Anybody else?
And so that would be for the committee and the candidates.
Correct.
So that $100 thing would be the maximum, correct?
$100 a day is the maximum fine amount that could be imposed.
Unless you impose against the committee and the candidates separately.
Okay.
Yes. And I think, you know, if I can opine, this certainly makes a statement. Because what you kind of said, I mean, yeah, we throw out $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 fines when we've had people repeatedly before the commission or overly, 7, 8 referrals. It's been a year and a half, 2 years since we've gotten by the time the report was to be filed, and we get them. But we reconsider those all the time. And yet we are certainly not going under the expectation that that's what we're getting from those folks. It mounts quickly and it can be substantial. This is different from those types of fines that the community imposes. This would be different.
We've imposed big fines too when there have been big campaigns, and even
Yeah.
sophisticated ones where they can't reconcile or they've had issues. We've expected them to do better.
Right.
Because we understand things happen, but there have been rare occasions, but those are the very rare exceptions.
Any more discussion?
Well, we haven't heard from you two yet, but I haven't heard from Mr. Tomorrow, so I did see her shake her head like she was in.
I think we agree. Okay. All right.
Any
So-
thoughts on his writing or anything like that?
I think he's got his market.
Everybody has thoughts on that, right? That's a whole different issue, though, I think.
I think he's got his marching orders.
So as I understand, the executive director is going to draft a document, a statement along the lines that we've just discussed.
Correct.
And our next meeting, hopefully, we will then vote on it as an initiative.
Adopt it.
I
Correct.
mean, in this particular opinion, do you foresee your structure of this having a resuscitation of facts here?
Somewhat, yes. I think that's an obligation that we have to lay some of that.
To support our decision.
Yes.
Right. Well,
Yeah, no.
I mean,
okay. So on the 290 thing, you could feel facts about the 290 issue, and that could be it, and the violation would be supported. I'm saying all the things that we were talking about that could go towards that, all these facts. I don't want to rehash all of them, but I mean, if we're talking about guidance, or guidance instead of sending a message, the whole circumstances of this need to be put out there a little bit, not a painstakingly this person said this, this person said that, but really, because I don't think that this is a case of just the $290,000 bill showed up and somebody discarded it, and that's enough to support the violation. But I believe we're looking at
right.
a situation where, to use my words, don't use an opinion, the campaign in the box
Mm-hmm.
thing, where you have this whole preponderance of of things that, you know, that occurred that kind of maybe even led to this to a certain degree?
No, I understand.
Okay.
And yeah, it's not, I'm not anticipating it being, you know, 290,000 was thrown out there, it was ignored, and therefore it shouldn't have been, and, you know, just having that be the statement. I've certainly tried to keep notes what everybody said. I will see how good I did. I can always go back and listen to the,
Well, and you got to live through the hearing as well.
yeah, and I got to listen to the hearing, and I could go back and listen to things
This
as
isn't-
well. But I, you know, I
This
will
isn't
put in,
any indictment on past
No.
opinions or anything like
No.
that. That's,
I don't think it
we're
is.
talking about what we're trying to achieve in this opinion.
Right, and I understand.
Okay.
And I will, and what I was about to say was, I will go through and, you know, put in things that I think both have been talked about today and things that are pertinent to the nature of the commission's finding. As I circulate this, if you see something that you say, wait a minute, he didn't include this, it needs to be added, you know, make that comment, and, you know, either we can discuss it, I can add in, you know, right, yeah, not to everybody, just to me. And I'll keep working through that, let's put it that way. And so,
When do you think we can expect to have something to review?
meeting is next Thursday. I can try and get something to you by Friday.
This week?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was gonna say Monday, but
Yeah,
I was gonna do Monday.
Yeah.
This week's like a work on the weekend.
yeah.
Thanks a lot. I'm certainly not promising, but,
we just opened the door.
but I'm, you know, I mean, I'm not gonna go right back and start on this, because there's a couple of things Chris and I have to do otherwise, but I'm gonna try and get it done as quickly as I can, but also be as thorough as I can, and get it to you guys as soon as possible. And yeah, it may not be till Monday, but I'm gonna shoot to get it to you on Friday.
Thank you.
You know, and that way, that gives us, mainly because I've got a lot of other stuff to do before next Thursday's meeting as well. You know, and so I've got a variety of things on my plate, and I want to get this done.
So do each of your commissioners.
Exactly. I want to get this done so that it can start the churning process, and getting it along. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Okay.
I'm not trying to write one, sorry.
And you weren't. And I've done, you know, I mean, I haven't done a lot of these, but I've done enough. You saw what I did on, you guys have all been, and I did, I've done, you know, over the years, I've probably done about 10 of these. I've done a lot, but, you know, you get a feel for the things you need to lay out, to substantiate what it is that you're holding, and then, you know, also substantiate the basis for all of it. So anyway.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Everybody in favor?
Yeah.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, we're done. We're done.
Scott, you take care of the recycle tonight.
I will, absolutely.
There you go.